Hi there, I'm your host, Mr. Doyle, and this is a great undertaking. I took a week off from the Creepshow series last week to take a look at the Chapelwaite series, which I highly recommend. But now it's time to go back to Creepshow with a ranking of the second season of the series from the streaming service Shudder. That's a tongue twister. The second season of the series from the streaming service Shudder. Second season of the series from the streaming service Shudder. Second series of... I covered the history and background of this series in my video for the Season 1 ranking, so if that is of interest to you and you haven't seen it yet, the link is in the description below. Creepshow Season 2, Ranked. Alright, so just like my Season 1 ranking, I based my ranking on 4 factors: story and themes, acting, special effects, and scares/creepiness. I used a point system for each factor in order to tally up the scores for each individual story to determine the order, and I'll be presenting them in order from lowest to highest score, the lowest possible score being a 0 and the highest being 20. I have to say, I enjoyed the first season of Creepshow a great deal more than I did the second season. The second season seems to embrace the vibes of the original Creepshow movie, and I'm finding more and more that the Creepshow brand of low-budget effects and overall corniness just isn't my style. But when it works, it can be fairly entertaining, if painful at times. Sibling Rivalry. Score 4. There is nothing I despise more than intentionally dumb, purposely obnoxious teen characters in horror, and this episode's main character is both thoroughly dumb and painfully obnoxious. On top of that, the story is predictable, the characters all kind of suck, and there was what appeared to be some overdone CGI. This episode was written by lesser-known writer Melanie Dale, who I couldn't find any info about, and this episode was directed by Rusty Kundaif, who also directed Tales from the Hood 1 through 3 and 25 episodes of Chappelle's Show. The Right Snuff. Score 6. I hated this episode. Even the title is awful. It had a decent enough premise, but there was some awful acting, miserable creature effects, and green screen use, and the ending was just completely silly. This episode was written by Paul Dini, who wrote for a bunch of animated series, including Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids, Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventures, and Animaniacs, as well as Stephen Langford, who worked on Family Matters and Saved by the Bell, and Greg Nicotero. The story was directed by Joe Lynch, who wrote the 1999 Trauma Entertainment movie Terror Firmer and directed Wrong Turn 2: Dead End. Pipe Screams. Score 7. This episode almost managed to have a socio-political message or theme, but it ultimately failed to deliver it. The acting is awful, the special effects are passable at best, and it's not really scary or creepy at all. The story was written by Daniel Kraus, who adapted Guillermo del Toro's The Shape of Water to novel form, and also was tasked with finishing the late Romero book, The Living Dead, following Romero's passing. The episode was directed by Joe Lynch, who wrote a bunch of episodes for Season 1. Directed a bunch of episodes in Season 1 as well. Dead and Breakfast. Score 8. The premise for this episode wasn't terrible, but overall it just didn't work for me. It's likely my inner boomer, though. Anytime a show incorporates like live streaming and social media as core tenets of a story, it's an immediate turnoff for me. On top of that, the acting isn't great, and most of the characters were just annoying. This episode was written by Michael Rousselet, who apparently wrote a movie called Dude Bro Party Massacre and worked on the animated series Cyanide and Happiness. The episode was directed by Axel Carolyn, who also directed The Haunting of Bly Manor, and most recently has a director credit for the 10th season of American Horror Story double feature. Within the Walls of Madness, score 8. This episode had a Lovecraftian Cthulhu vibe to it, but it suffered from bad acting and some lame special effects. There was some decent gore though, so it wasn't a total loss. The episode was written by series regulars John Esposito and, of course, Greg Nicotero, and was directed by John Harrison, who most recently executive produced the 2021 Dune remake. Pesticide, score 12. This episode was alright. Actor Josh McDermott, best known for his role as Eugene on The Walking Dead, is suitably pompous and obnoxious. The special effects are okay, but the episode relies heavily on the dream within a dream trope and playing the is it really happening or isn't it game. It made the episode feel a bit cheap and like they weren't willing to commit to a moral or theme. The story was written by Frank Dietz, who has acted in and written a number of low-budget, lesser-known horror movies, and was also an animator at Disney, whose work can be seen in Hercules, Mulan, and Tarzan. Nicotero was once again in the director's chair for this episode. Twittering from the Circus of the Dead, score 12. This was actually the second part of an animated special that was released between Season 1 and Season 2, but I'm including it in this ranking because I feel like it. Fuck off. Sorry, that was very rude. This episode was based on a short story by Joe Hill, who is, of course, Stephen King's son. The episode was directed by Nicotero and voiced by Joey King, who, from what I can tell, is of no relation to Stephen King or Joe Hill. There are some enjoyable graphic scenes, and the episode plays close to the original story, but the quality of the animations and illustrations are inconsistent at best. Honestly, this isn't really what I would consider to be animated, but rather it's a narrated comic book with some moving parts. Considering the inspiration for the entire Creepshow concept was EC Comics and horror comics, it's fitting, but man, some of these illustrations look like they were done on MS Paint. But not all of them. Some of the panels are really great, and then the very next scene looks like it was done in a completely different, much lower quality style by a completely different artist. I'm not sure what happened here, but yeah, it's kind of awful sometimes. Survivor Type, score 13. This was the first part of the animated special that was released between seasons 1 and 2. The story was written by Stephen King and was originally published in the 1982 horror anthology Terrors, plural, Terrors, and was later included in King's 1985 collection Skeleton Crew. Nicotero directs, and the voice acting was done by Kiefer Sutherland, who does a great job. This segment suffers from the same inconsistent illustration and animation issues that Twittering from the Circus of the Dead did. At times it's awesome and gruesome, and then the next moment it looks poorly executed and half-baked. Overall, it is enjoyable, but I just don't understand what happened with the artwork on these animated episodes. Shapeshifters Anonymous, score 16. This was a holiday special, and it was just so ridiculous, but entertaining and over the top in the best ways. The special effects makeup wasn't incredible, but it was the theme and story that really made this episode work. To be clear, it shouldn't have worked, but somehow I find it to be one of the better episodes in this ranking. It's a unique take on the lore of lycanthropes and a variety of oddball shapeshifters that involves biblical tales, the dark origin story of Santa Claus, and just a whole lot of silliness. This episode was written by J.A. Conrath, who has a massive bibliography, and I'm surprised I've not heard of him before. And the episode was directed by Greg Nicotero. Model Kid. Score 16. This episode dealt with some heavy subject matter that hit a bit close to home for me, but it manages to not take itself too seriously and has some fun costuming, makeup effects, and monsters. There were some pacing issues, but when you have just over 20 minutes to tell a story as dynamic in tones and themes as this one, I imagine it's tricky to get it just right. Overall, I really enjoyed this episode. It ties in the world of classic monsters with some real-life drama that made for a unique episode. Model Kid was written by John Esposito, who wrote multiple stories for the Walking Dead web series, an episode of the anthology series Masters of Horror, and multiple episodes for the Creepshow series. The episode was directed once again by Greg Nicotero.
Well, hey there. So I forgot an entire episode somehow. I mean, I watched it and somehow just forgot to include it in the ranking. So that episode is called Night of the Living Late Show. It's got Justin Long in it, who you may recognize from Jeepers Creepers or Tusk. It was directed by Nicotero and was written by someone whose name I forget now, but they wrote on The Simpsons as well as Doug. And then, let's see, it's a really bizarre, cool concept where they insert Justin Long's character into this existing real-life horror movie, like it actually exists. It's a real movie. And he's interacting with the characters in the movie, and there are consequences for his interacting with people in this film. Anyway, it was a cool concept. It was well executed. The acting was good. I'm giving it an 18. It's an 18, I decided. And I'm not sure how I forgot to include it, but I did, because fucking, I don't know, whoops.
Public Television of the Dead. Score 20. This is a perfect episode. I'm willing to admit that it's likely my nostalgia talking, but it was just such an enjoyable premise. This episode is an homage to the classic Evil Dead trilogy and uses the Necronomicon, the Book of the Dead, from those movies as part of the episode. There are classic Evil Dead camera shots, throwback dialogue, and even Ted Raimi plays a major role in the episode. Ted Raimi played numerous roles in the original Evil Dead films and is the brother of Sam Raimi, who directed all three movies, Evil Dead 1 and 2 and Army of Darkness. If you're a fan of the Evil Dead franchise, this is a must-see. On top of that, there are parodies of classic PBS shows throughout that add to that nostalgic experience. I fucking loved this episode. 20 out of 20, the only perfect score thus far. The episode was written by returning writer Rob Schrab, who, as I discussed in my last video, is best known for working on comedy TV shows, and was directed by Nicotero. Alright, that's it for Creepshow Season 2, and next week will be the final Creepshow video, for now at least, in which I'll be ranking Season 3. After that, I'll be moving on to the absolute classic collection of beloved King novellas, Different Seasons, which includes Rita Hayworth and the Shawshank Redemption, Apt Pupil, The Body, and The Breathing Method. 4 wholly unique stories that further prove King's ability to write outside of the horror thriller genre. New videos drop every Saturday at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, so clap some subscriber bell cheeks to get notifications. Okay, goodbye. Be sure to click like and subscribe to the channel for my continued analysis of all things Stephen King, pretty please with blood and guts on top. My name is Mr. Doyle, and this has been a great undertaking.